Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for your time today. I'm Palavika. I'm a product manager for our CDN product area, which spans the Vercel Edge network and firewall. Today, I'm also joined by two of my amazing colleagues on our sales engineering team, Thomas and Jared. This doesn't need to be too formal, though. You can always ask any questions in the chat. But before we begin our presentation, I just wanted to get a sense of where the audience is at in terms of their experience and posture with respect to network security. So I've got a short poll for everyone. We'll just start that right now. We'll give everyone maybe a few minutes to answer this. Some like Jeopardy music in the background. I'm really bad at singing, so I'm going to spare people like me humming the Jeopardy tune. It looks like we've reached steady state. I'll give like 10 more seconds for, we got one more response, but I'll give a few more seconds in case anyone else has to get their responses in. Awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and poll. And I have no idea if you can see the results, so I'll read out the results. But actually, if someone could indicate, can you actually see how the audience answered? Okay, I'm gonna assume no, so I'll read out the questions. But our first question, which you've answered, is are you familiar? Oh, actually, there's a share results button. This is clearly my first time using the polling function of Zoom. So I assume now you can see it, but I'll still continue to read it in case you can't. Are you familiar with firewall administration? Interestingly, we've got about 50-50 split in the audience. Unfortunately, 50% of you have had the joy of firewall administration. And for the other half of you, this is a relatively kind of new topic. So that's useful to know for me just to kind of gauge people's familiarity with the subject. And so one of the things actually that's interesting also for us to see is what WAF is your organization using. I think this is just useful also to see kind of what your familiarity is from a feature set. Oh, actually, I'll pause there. I know we've got a question about previous webinars. I think if the marketing team wants to quickly answer that, Michelle. But I believe all the previous webinars, there should be a way to get the recording for some of those. Actually, I'll let the marketing team share information on that through the chat. But through I think, looking at the poll, we've got a mix here. Quite a few people are using Vercel actually as their WAF. And then there's a handful of people using some of the more kind of, I would say, popular solutions like Cloudflare, CloudFront, and Akamai. Interestingly, no Fastly, even though that's actually a really popular one kind of amongst our enterprise customer base generally. And some folks are using another WAF, and it's about 14%. Awesome. So this is helpful just to get a sense of people's background and familiarity. And sounds like people are actually reasonably familiar, but not everyone. Awesome. And so with that, thank you. With that, I actually wanted to start with a deep dive. And I think before we go into a deep dive into the Vercel Firewall, I wanted to actually take a moment to provide some context on Vercel's Edge network. Vercel is a comprehensive front-end cloud. You've probably seen this, it's on our marketing website, but we don't just host your application. We're actually architected so that you can optimally build and deliver your dynamic, personalized application to a user anywhere in the world. We want to reduce the burden and complexity of managing infrastructure, and this includes your CDN. We have over 100 points of presence, and once a request ingresses at one of the POPs, the request goes over private fiber to one of 18 edge regions. And so maybe just going into a little bit more detail what happens once it does ingress. So if we take a look at how a request gets handled by Vercel, and I don't know, I love a network architecture diagram. I think it helps to like visualize how everything gets handled. So it first gets evaluated by the Vercel Firewall once a request ingresses into Vercel. If the request is allowed, then Vercel handles any subsequent routing logic. So this would be your redirects, rewrites, edge middleware. Just to clarify any confusion, redirects in the Vercel firewall will get handled in the firewall. But if you have redirects kind of in your actual code base, that gets handled in routing. Then once the request is routed, if it's a cache hit, the request is then served from the Vercel edge cache. And if it's a cache miss, we'll fetch the updated content and Vercel functions get invoked as needed. So as you can see, network security actually plays a really critical role for any Vercel user. Because Vercel's infrastructure is infinitely scalable, or maybe not infinitely, but quite elastically scalable. The firewall isn't just about application reliability and data security, which is often the case for many firewalls, but it's truly about protecting your app against any unwanted traffic. Because this also has financial implications as Vercel functions will end up getting invoked. And that's really why we've purpose-built our firewall for a modern dynamic web and really focus on the network security problems that are faced by modern web applications. I think a lot of firewalls were kind of built 20 years ago, and the way in which firewall administration happens is really designed for a web of 20 years ago, and really not for, I think, the web that we have today. And so today we'll be going into much more detail on kind of how to secure your applications. And, but I also just want to take a moment to talk about, what are some of the challenges faced by modern web applications? And so I think, if we also kind of go back to how firewalls were designed, really addressing some of the kinds of attack patterns of 20 years ago, I think what we've seen is, or maybe not even 20 years ago, but even in the last like 5 to 10 years, we've seen such an increase in automated traffic, whether that's being used to launch a large-scale DDoS attack, scrape content, brute force a login page, or scan for vulnerabilities. I think automated traffic is really one of the biggest security pain points today on the public internet. And I think people are less worried about kind of vulnerability exploits and making sure that their firewall is patched, largely because I think, frameworks like Next.js are really, I think, quite secure and stay on top of security out of the box. Awesome. And so with that, continuing on our network architecture deep dive, I wanted to just break down some of the different aspects of the firewall. So the first kind of service of the Vercel firewall terminates the TLS connection and applies our system level managed firewall rules. This actually happens before we have kind of the full metadata about your project. We'll apply blocks based off of host. And so this is why actually, interestingly, you'll see kind of host-based rules as well as actual project level rules when you set up your Vercel firewall. And part of that is because the firewall itself operates across L3, L4, and L7 of the OSI model. So this first level of protection is designed to stop DDoS attacks, low quality traffic, and generally protect the Vercel platform from any kind of abuse. We also evaluate any persistent actions, and we'll talk more about what that is, or IP blocking rules at this stage. And if the request is dropped at this stage, you don't actually get an edge request usage invoked at this point. So anything that's dropped kind of at this stage does not incur an edge request. If the request is allowed, it then goes through deployment protection to figure out which, if it has access to the deployment that it's requesting. And then if it's subsequently allowed, then the edge request actually reaches your project, and then it's evaluated through attack challenge mode, the WAF custom rules, and then any managed rules that you've got as well. And we'll go into much more detail about how you can use these features to protect your application from any kind of common attacks. But I'll pause here to see if there's any questions. Look in the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions, but maybe I'll give you a moment if anyone wants to ask a question in the chat. Cool. I will move on. But we'll have a Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, this is not your last time to ask it. So one of the most common attack patterns I wanted to talk about is a denial of service attack. So a denial of service attack occurs when your application is overwhelmed with network traffic generated by a malicious actor with the intent, or perhaps a supply chain of malicious actors with the intention of taking down your site. Realistically, in order to take down a site, you'd need to compromise a really large number of devices and get them to simultaneously send a lot of traffic to an application. So that's typically how a DDoS attack occurs. A threat actor, or as I mentioned, probably a supply chain of threat actors, will often leverage malware or vulnerability exploits to first compromise devices. You kind of have a C2 server then to then control all those devices and generate a DDoS attack to target a specific application. This is generally not a common attack pattern for all applications. Like, I don't think my personal website's gonna get a DDoS attack, most likely. It'd be an unfortunate use of people's resources. I don't think reliability of my personal website super of high importance for me. But if you're a prominent brand, or if you operate a very well-known site, I think also, people who are operating in a space where they might be publishing content that someone doesn't want them to publish, there's a high chance somebody might actually try to take down your site, either to disrupt your business operations or demand ransom payment, or altogether just silence you on the internet. And so they are an attack that many of our customers, I think, really do care about and want to protect against. And so you can rest assured, Vercel will protect your application automatically against any volumetric DDoS attacks. As previously mentioned, Vercel provides DDoS mitigation across L3, L4, and L7 of the OSI model. All of these protections are actually enabled by default for all projects, so that all customers don't have to worry about anyone taking down their site or creating a runaway bill. I think the runaway bill and unwanted usage is really one of the primary reasons I think, we really want this to be on by default and doesn't require any additional configuration. Again, we want managed infrastructure to be really easy to implement. These are also these protections are designed to protect Vercel as a platform, so that the platform doesn't go down for all our customers. If we do experience a really large scale DDoS attack, even if Vercel doesn't go down, it could cause noisy neighbor problems. And so, separately from load shedding, we also want to make sure that we're actively mitigating against attack traffic. And so you don't need, as I said, you don't need to do anything to use our system mitigations. They're on by default. But if you do have any concerns, if that legitimate traffic is being blocked or could be blocked, you can always create system bypass rules or disable the system mitigations altogether. I know most of you had said you were, or not most of you, there's quite a few of you that said you were using another WAF. Some of you said Cloudflare, some of you said CloudFront, and some of you said Akamai as well. And so if you are using another WAF, as long as you've got, Cloudflare works out of the box, we recognize their IP space, and don't shape traffic from Cloudflare. But if you've got, I think CloudFront or Akamai, and you haven't already had trusted proxy kind of set up or made sure that you've got the right kind of setup there, it's worth just creating a support ticket, so that we can make sure that you've got all the right settings in place to make sure that we're not shaping any traffic, if you want the security to be handled by your CDN vendor. And so I think kind of going on, we're always monitoring traffic to Vercel projects, and we're continuously improving our defenses. So this isn't just, protection against volumetric attacks. We actually do look really carefully at traffic patterns. and traffic that's really impacting across the platform. And so if we see someone performing path or enumeration or doing some kind of suspicious activity, or if we know that the IP is of low quality, we'll drop that request kind of across the platform so that none of our customers have to pay for that traffic. And so I wanted to show a quick demo of DDoS mitigation in action, actually on the Next.js site. But I'll just pause here. I don't know if there's any questions. I'll give anyone a moment to type in any questions. Awesome. So actually, this is not where I wanted to start. I'm going to start with the project page for the next site. So actually, if you go on the project homepage, you can actually see, this is something we've added in January. You can actually see that the firewall kind of status, it's active, and it's mitigating attack traffic, it's challenging suspicious traffic. And so you can see that directly from the project homepage. And that's also to make sure, everyone's aware that we are shaping your traffic. And you can learn more about that. And so if I click that, I can see here more information about kind of the traffic to the next. I'll come back to the questions in a bit. But so here you can see some of the all of the kind of traffic we have here on the Next.js site. And if I want to look into something in more detail, I can always inspect the traffic in more detail. One of the things I actually pre-populated was a monitoring query where I inspected anything that I think was kind of triggering DDoS mitigations. I was curious to see what the ASN that was generating that traffic. And so I can see that actually there's a lot of traffic here coming from DigitalOcean and then also from actually India. From Bharti Airtel, the telco there, in terms of suspicious traffic to the doc site. Or not, sorry, the doc site, the next site. Awesome. So I will go back to the presentation. And I think there was a question here. So having Cloudflare with Vercel as a WAF is more of a double contingency, or is Cloudflare unnecessary? Cloudflare is probably more unnecessary, but I think it depends on what use cases you're using Cloudflare for. I mean, I would say for core WAF, we have feature parity with Cloudflare's WAF. I mean, obviously, if there's some observability, I think that's probably where I think there might be probably some gaps with Cloudflare. But I think, one of the biggest challenges I think of having any CDN in front of Vercel is it does add latency. And and again, kind of going back to what we said earlier, ideally, you don't have to deal with, especially when it comes to things like caching. I don't think you really want to have sort of two CDNs kind of colliding with each other. And especially when you're using Vercel to kind of leverage some of the next features like ISR, and you really want to serve dynamic content. I think that's really where I think having a lot of the infrastructure, like the sort of framework defined infrastructure that comes from the CDN side from Next, kind of out of the box with Vercel can be really useful. And so I think for that reason, plus the performance is really where I think you get the kind of, I would say, the benefits of dropping Cloudflare. From a security perspective, it is a bit redundant, but again, I think it depends on your use cases. And we definitely see a lot of customers have a security team that is, it sort of looks organization wide, and not every application that the organization is using is on Vercel. And so especially if some of those are like legacy WordPress accounts, you might be doing an incremental migration. So we definitely have customers who do have a WAF in place, but obviously today is about using the Vercel Firewall. And so I think, where I really recommend, I think, moving kind of just to Vercel is, if your applications are all on Vercel, I really do think it makes sense to kind of consolidate your front end. And you can really benefit from everything that Vercel has. But again, it can really be on like an organization specific issue. And is there any harm on having firewall set up on Vercel and the CDN? I would say you probably don't want to do both. And the reason is if you've got a reverse proxy in front, we actually have reduced visibility into the traffic that then comes to us. And so, I mean, we won't be able to see, we won't be able to do JAWFR fingerprinting accurately. And so that's actually one of the things when we see that the traffic ingresses from a CDN, we don't shape it. We assume that the CDN is shaping it, and that, I mean, in some cases, like where there is a large amount of suspicious traffic, there's certain rules we don't apply. Anywhere where we're confident that we can apply a rule and we do have sufficient visibility, unless you have this explicit system bypass rule, we won't. We'll still continue to do some mitigations, but not all of the mitigations. But I think this is also where I think. Let me go back to the question. So in terms of having both, where I caution against in particular though is authoring WAF rules on Vercel. I actually have seen some customers do this. I've seen customers who prefer our WAF UX, but then, for example, there's certain headers that they get from Cloudflare, and so they'll actually match on Cloudflare headers and use that to create WAF rules. But I would avoid that setup because again, because we don't have full visibility, it's very difficult to troubleshoot issues when you have kind of two WAFs in place and you've got a CDN. So if you do have something in front of Vercel, I think that's where I recommend probably authoring firewall rules solely in whatever you have in front. Awesome. I'm going to talk a bit more about the bots, so I'll answer that one later, or about verified bots, and to make sure that they don't get blocked by the firewall. And then I'll also end up talking a little bit more about how granular, I'll be answering actually all the points that Joshua just raised. So I'll continue on, which is actually a great segue into the next section. So the next attack vector I want to talk a lot about is bad bots. Automated traffic, also known as bots, make up about half of internet traffic today. About 2/3 of bot traffic, or 1/3 of all internet traffic, comes from malicious bots. And the other third of bot traffic, which is about 1/6 of internet traffic, comes from known bots. But then not all of these might be bots you want on your site. I know Claudebot is one that I think a lot of folks have had a bit of pain with and may not actually want crawling their sites. So bots are used to perform a range of nefarious activities. We've talked about DDoS attacks just now, but also content scraping, brute forcing login and payments pages, inventory denial. So how can we stop bots activity on our application? We talked a lot about how we stop bad bots as part of DDoS protection. I mean, I think inherently a volumetric attack really is launched by automated traffic. But what else can we do to stop bad bots on the internet using the Vercel Firewall? And so one of the most effective ways of protecting your application from unwanted bot activity is implementing a rate limit. It's generally a best practice to implement a rate limit across your entire site, and then to also secure your /API route and then any sensitive paths like /login. And when configuring a rate limiting rule in Vercel, you can either serve a JavaScript challenge, do I think the default response 429 too many requests, or just outright deny any traffic that exceeds the rate limits. And one of the reasons I really like rate limits actually as a way of addressing bot activity is you can really tailor the limits to what makes sense for your application. And you don't have to worry about, at least not to the same extent as other methods of addressing bots, having to allow list good bots in case, I think that can be a time-consuming exercise, making sure that you've got, all of the kind of the right services allowed to your application. And so that's I think one way to address bots, but one of the things I'm actually really excited about, and one of the things we're really focused this quarter from a product development perspective is bot management. Again, as we said, this is like probably one of the biggest issues faced by our customers. And it's really important to us that we want to make it really easy for all Vercel users to be able to monitor and control bot activity on their projects. So one of the things we are going to be shipping in a few weeks is actually called Bot Filter. It'll be very soon. We're actually internally dog fooding this right now. This is going to be a free managed rule set, and it's available to all Vercel customers. And once it's enabled in challenge mode, you can then send a JavaScript challenge to any traffic originating from non-browser sources. So the managed rule set evaluates the request and assesses, is this traffic coming from a likely browser source, or is this coming from a human? Now, again, this is, I would say, a first kind of assessment. So this isn't going to catch really sophisticated bots that are doing a lot of like, human-like cloaking and trying to mask their bot. I guess their bot identity in many ways, but anything that's like so much of this is just obvious, user agent patterns, the ASN. We look at a range of heuristics on. We look at kind of the fingerprint to make sure that does this look like it's a browser? Is this conforming to what a browser would look like? And if it's not, we'll issue a JavaScript challenge. And so when this is available, we do recommend starting with the rule set, like any managed rule, or even actually just any WAF rule that you author, starting with this in log mode for about a week, just to make sure you can monitor any bot activity, and make sure that any automated traffic that you want to your site is allowed. Just because there might be certain cron jobs or services you're using that you do want to have access to your site. We are going to actually exclude verified bots. So in conjunction with this, and after we have bot filter, we'll have a more explicit verified bots managed rule set as well. That's going to come down probably soon after after bot filter is available. But out of the box with bot filter, we will exclude verified bots. So things like Googlebot, which was previously asked about, a range of other services. I know ingest is very popular, and things like Facebook, and other verified bots. We'll make the full list of everything that we verified at the moment. Those will be available in the Vercel docs once we've shipped the feature. And as I mentioned, this is something that we're internally dog fooding, and it's going to be coming kind of imminently. So I'll pause here. And there's lots of bot filter. Okay, I'll actually take one of these first questions. Is bot filter enabled by default? The answer is no, at least not today. I think our goal would be probably on net new projects at some point in the future. I think we're going to start with this being disabled by default, and it's something customers opt into. I think just given that it could, really impact traffic, I think that's something we don't want to have on by default to start with. But it is something that I think we hear a lot from customers, a desire to have something secure by default, and we really do want to make sure that customers can deploy a project and not have to think about having to make all these changes. And so I think the model we will probably move to in the future, and once we've shipped this and again looked at customer feedback and seen how people are like what success the folks are having with this, once it's more widely available, I think will be to have it on by default for new projects, and then you explicitly opt out of it, and then and it's much easier to allow list traffic that you want to your site when you're kind of dealing with a new project. And then for existing projects, I think that's something that you'll have to opt into. Let me see, there's a few other questions. Will bot filter allow managing an allow list or a deny list or both? So bot filter, when it's going to be first launched, will run as a managed rule set. So it will be evaluated after your custom WAF rules. And so everything that is like anything you want to bypass evaluation by bot filter, you can write as a bypass rule, a custom WAF rule with a bypass action, and then it shouldn't go down to bot filter. And then to ask the question of blocking verified bots, with bot filter, no, but our plan is actually with our verified bots rule set, once that is released, we'll give at least category level granularity, and then for kind of an advanced add-on will be providing the bot level granularity. But for all customers, you'll have at least category level granularity into, when I say category, is this a SEO bot or is this a security tool? And all of the verified bots will be categorized. And so at least on a category basis, you can say, I want to have this be allowed to my application. But again, this will be evaluated after all your custom WAF rules. Or I want to deny requests from this specific bot. And then I think beyond, anything that spoofs verification, if it's clearly like pretending to be Google bot and not, that's going to be blocked at the platform level. And then in terms of, wanting to actually write even more granular rules, I would say custom WAF rules is probably the best way to like do the user agent matching and then, or, user agent IP pair, and then decide whether or not you want to block or allow that, if that helps answer that question. Awesome. I will move on actually then, because I think we're now about halfway through the webinar, and I did want to also, I think there's some questions about kind of what kind of rules can you author. So I do want to take a bit of time to talk about that. So we've talked about how you can secure your application when it comes to common attack vectors, but every application is different. And security isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that's why, it's great to have managed rule sets. It's good to have kind of automatic protection, but we also have a lot of tools within the firewall, and that's part of why we have today's webinar, so that you can really implement the security model that makes sense for your organization. And we really want to make sure that you can use these tools most effectively. So as I said, that's why we have the webinar today, so that you can really learn how the Vercel Firewall works, and you can take advantage and really most effectively use some of the features that you get for free out of the box with Vercel. So one of the best places to start actually when thinking about how to secure your app, or even how better to secure your app, is your network logs. With the observability features on the firewall tab of the Vercel dashboard or the Vercel Observability Suite. I don't know if some of you are using the Vercel Observability Suite, but this is kind of something that we launched in December, or we went GA in December, and we've been making a lot of improvements to kind of over the last few months and continue to improve. Especially network observability is a big focus area for kind of going into the next few months. With all of these tools, you can really dig into traffic patterns and identify traffic that you want to block. You can also send all your logs to your SIM and do analysis there. All of the relevant metadata is passed on into your logs. So I think earlier you saw a quick demo of some of the kind of observability on the firewall tab. I showed you a little bit about monitoring. I can actually just go back to that. It's right here. So we looked here, and you can actually look at, let's actually just go into allowed requests. And so here I can get a breakdown by user agent. I can also break this down by all other kinds of criteria. And if I want to dig even deeper, I can write kind of custom queries here to whether that's AS name. Maybe I want to look at, client IP country. I won't query that because IP addresses, I think, are PII, so I'll leave that. I won't actually make that query, but those are the kinds of things you can do with our observability tools. And I would say that, I would really encourage you to dig into your own traffic and just play around with it. I really love looking at kind of network logs and seeing what traffic is there. And it's always really interesting to look at production traffic and see what patterns exist. And I think that's kind of where you start to understand, okay, this is like, what is I expect in terms of traffic to my site, and what looks suspicious. I think business logic is often the best place to start with, how should I really be thinking about what kind of traffic I should allow or block or challenge on my site. So, once you are able to identify whatever unwanted traffic patterns, or just in general, if there's certain certain types of rules you might want to implement. For example, if you're a US company and you want to block, country, requests from countries on the OFAC sanctions list, because I mean, no one from Iran should be probably buying things from your e-commerce site. You can always author firewall rules to do that. And the custom WAF rules, I think there's a question about this earlier. We actually support a lot of different we support a lot of different criteria that you can use to match against pretty much everything about the request, with the exception of the actual payload itself. I think we've gotten feedback about people wanting to be able to match on payload as well. So I think that will probably soon come. But we pretty much allow you to match on a really wide range of criteria about the request. And then depending on, and you can use kind of and or operators to construct whatever sort of firewall kind of rule you'd like. And then we have a range of actions as well, whether that's log, bypass, redirect, serve a JavaScript challenge, rate limit, or deny the traffic. And so those are all kind of the ways that you can author a custom WAF rule. And I'd encourage you to check, I think the docs are a good place to go for more information on that. And one feature I'd actually wanted to spend a bit of time talking about is persistent actions. I think it's a very powerful feature, but it's also not very well understood. It's actually an aspect of custom WAF rules. And I think it's a lot easier to understand once someone's kind of walked through how this works. I think just something about the wording of things like client and device just makes much more sense when it's kind of said aloud than when it's read. So for any custom WAF rule, actually, you can add the ability to apply a persistent action. And what this means is if a request triggers a WAF rule, you can then persist the action of that WAF rule for a specified time frame for any subsequent requests from that client. So like that client device is like the IP address. So in a concrete example, let's say I have a device that triggers a rate limit on a specific path. The device will be rate limited on this specific path because I'm, rate limiting by IP. But I want to prevent that device from making any more requests to my application overall. And so I want to block this IP that triggers this rate limit for an hour across my entire project. And if I apply this persistent action, it not only prevents the device from kind of making any more requests, but it actually drops the request earlier in the request evaluation process. So if we go back to that network diagram, the persistent action gets applied like as one of the first things, along with IP blocking and DDoS mitigation. And so if that IP is blocked due to a persistent action, you won't actually get an edge request incurred by that. Another example is, say there's like a series of actions, maybe there's like a combination of like, it makes a post request to a certain path. And maybe there's also a JUF or user agent, like there's a combination of criteria. And some device makes a request and it triggers your WAF rule. In that scenario, any subsequent requests that device would make would continue to still be about, like, just again, because a WAF itself evaluates the request on a kind of per request basis. Any other requests will always have to be evaluated by the firewall. And so again, I think if you are able to apply a persistent action, we can pretty much put somebody kind of, Akamai calls this the penalty box, which I think is a very intuitive name. So if someone does something and it's bad, and we don't want it to happen, we can just put that user into the penalty box, or that IP into the penalty box, and then for a certain amount of time, and going forward, we won't have any more requests from that. Actually, I'll pause here. I see there's a few more questions. If a managed rule ever block, so that if a managed rule blocks something you want to go through, managed rules get evaluated after your custom WAF rules. So all you need to do is create a custom WAF rule with a bypass action. And as soon as the bypass action, like as soon as that WAF rule, depending on the precedence of your WAF rule, If the WAF rule is then matched, it's a bypass action, no other WAF rules and managed rules would get evaluated. So it's like, say, my first custom WAF rule of 10 is like bypass if country is, I don't know, United Kingdom. And the client device is from the UK. Then in that case, none of the other 9 WAF rules would get evaluated, and none of it would bypass whatever managed rule sets you have turned on. Now, the one kind of exception to that is system mitigations, because those actually are handled first. And so if you do want to bypass our system DDoS mitigations and want to make sure that something is not blocked by that, that's where we have something specifically called a system bypass rule. And there's docs on that, but I think that there I would look into the docs, into the system bypass rules. And actually, Simon, I think one of the SEs can probably provide you with the specific documentation on the system bypass rules. So that way you can kind of bypass the system mitigate, or get the details on how to bypass system mitigations. And then how to possibility to grant access based on the subs rule. So this is an exception on a specific managed rule, effectively say you had like OWASP turned on and you don't want, at the moment today, no. I mean, I think in terms of like an enterprise, I think for an enterprise customer, when it comes to things like verified bots and bot filter, our plan is to actually expose those as like variables. You can write custom WAF rules as well. So I think that if you're using kind of an enterprise version of the Vercel Firewall, then you should be able to have, I mean, again, this is all future state. This is more just on the future of our plans, as opposed to, what's going to be imminently available in a few weeks. I think our intention is that you'll be able to use custom WAF rules and effectively use the primitives to be able to have that kind of granularity. Something we've considered actually is giving people the ability to maybe reorder managed rule sets alongside your custom WAF rules. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I think this is kind of where, I mean, and this is a problem I think all firewalls face, is kind of how do you manage being able to leverage managed rules, but then also bypass where you want to bypass. But it's definitely something we're thinking about and something we want customer feedback on. And I would say that if there's anything you don't see that you want to do, just let us know. I always love customer feedback, and we'll definitely it's things we're considering, and we definitely want your input to shape our roadmap. Awesome. And so the last feature I wanted to highlight is attack challenge mode. And this is an emergency break glass feature. Hopefully it's not something you use ever, or very often, certainly. And it allows you to challenge all traffic to your site. This is, as I said, this is something you should only use in case of an attack, and it's not clear how to fingerprint the malicious source of traffic. I mean, this is if DDoS mitigation is not able to stop what is some sort of bot activity. Maybe it's like a certain low and slow attack, but it's still high enough threshold to where it's doing something that you don't want. You're not able to sort of target the source of this malicious traffic. And this is kind of where, it's, a temporary band-aid you have until you're able to actually do the sort of incident response and triage and figure out exactly how you can fingerprint that traffic and stop it. And so, what this does is if attack challenge mode is turned on, every single request, or rather every single visitor, will be served a JavaScript challenge, or a browser challenge, effectively to test whether or not this is a user or a valid browser making a request, or if this is a bot. And so if it's automated, it won't pass the JavaScript challenge, and the request will be denied. And so that's kind of, again, if there is any legitimate automated traffic you want to your site, it could break that. And so that's the only reason I say I would implement it with caution. But it is something that I think is useful in the case, especially where if you don't actually have too much automated traffic to your site, you're seeing something like an attack, and again, it's something that's not necessarily a DDoS attack. but it's unwanted traffic and you're struggling to being able to fingerprint it, but it's causing a lot of harm. That's a place where I think, this has been quite effective for customers in stopping an attack. If bot, okay, I was actually just gonna look at this question. If bot traffic does get through and the charge of X is the extra traffic something we take on? So this is actually, I mean, today, when this gets implemented, any, the request will get stopped, but you will incur the edge request. I mean, there's a few, like ingress FDT, I think ends up getting charged. And like, because bot filter sits after all your custom WAF rules, it will be something that you would also see the what was I say, ingress FDT, and then and if I mean, highly unlikely you incur like additional kind of CPU charges based off of custom WAF rules, but in some crazy case you have 1,000 of them, there might be some the CPU charges. So that on day one, in theory, all of that will be charged. However, I mean, I think our intention is to zero rate it. It should be negligible enough to where it shouldn't impact your bill or MIUs, but I'd say, and this is something we actually want to monitor carefully. Joshua, if you, I would say just bring it back to us and support. Our intention is hopefully by, I think, the end of this first half of the year, that it's automatically zero rated, the traffic from those sources. It might be something we have to do manually. I mean, depending on if you're a pro or enterprise customer, we could adjust MIU usage. And if this is something that's like actually impacting kind of customer usage, we'll take kind of more proactive measures. But the answer is, yeah, our goal is like any bot traffic kind of stopped by bot filter. I think our intention is that that should not be something kind of, at least even medium term, something that the customer should take on. But I think we want to make sure that that's something that customers don't have to pay for. Is it possible to, yeah, I think, oh, sorry, that's Jared's question. Awesome. I'll pause there. We've got 13 minutes left. Happy to answer any other questions. Actually, this kind of, well, it's mostly Q&A. I did want to actually, before going into the Q&A though, I had just some stats actually for those who are curious. You may have seen our Black Friday, kind of on Black Friday, we had sort of a live ticker of the requests and what our edge network was, or what our infrastructure was handling. And the reason I wanted to highlight these stats is because I think, this is really one of our highest traffic and highest security risk days of the year. And I think if you're curious to see, how much can Vercel handle, what is the sort of kind of scale of our edge network, it is one that can, we handled 87 billion requests during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, a peak of actually nearly 2 million requests per second. And we blocked 3 billion. I mean, blocks are always a tough number. I'll say this, I'll even like kind of precurse this stat with a grain of salt. But we blocked 3 billion requests triggered by system mitigations. And another 500 million requests were blocked based off of custom WAF rules that our customers have written to kind of target unwanted traffic. So that's just kind of a summary of some of the scale that we handle. So with that, I'll just kind of pause here if there's any Q&A. And as I mentioned, any additional charges? No. So yeah, the goal is that this rule set is free for everybody, and there's no additional charges. And I'll just kind of take a moment to, this is something, as I said, as I started the presentation, like I think automated traffic and bots are like the biggest pain point modern web applications face today. I think we know that this is a problem, and this is a problem for like people using Vercel, like the growth of Vercel. And that's why I think, it's beneficial for our entire customer base to have this for free. Like we don't want customers to pay for traffic that they don't want to their application. And so this is very much why we're invested heavily in bot mitigation and making that available to everyone and really making sure that that's something that all Vercel customers can have. And so, because we see it as mutually beneficial, we will not charge for it. And yes, this presentation will be sent out along with the recording. I think oh, actually the actual presentation. We certainly can. I'll make sure we can make a PDF of the slides. And then we can send over the presentation for sure. I'll like work with the marketing team to make sure we do that. And then, oh, thank you, Mohammed. That's really kind of you. Like it's a pleasure to speak to you. I never cease to be amazed by what people build with Vercel. Like never cease to be amazed. I'm always just like completely jaw drop, like floored, amazed by the things that people build with Vercel. And honestly, the pleasure is mine to be here. And thank you so much for your time. With that, I assume there's no more questions, so I'll let Michelle wrap up, and I guess we'll probably end here. Thank you.